Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel, my friends. Sometimes life has a way of making you question if God is really with you. You look at the bills stacked on the table. You feel the weight of a broken relationship. You hear the voice in your head reminding you of every failure, and it feels like silence from heaven. But let me tell you something tonight. Silence does not mean absence. God is with you in ways you cannot even imagine, guiding, protecting, and strengthening you every single step. When life presses in on us from every side, it becomes so easy to believe that we have been forgotten. You pray, but heaven feels silent. You show up, but no one notices. You keep pushing forward, but everything inside you whispers, you are on your own. And in those moments, the temptation is to assume that God has taken a step back, that maybe your situation disqualified you, or maybe your mistakes were too loud for his mercy to cover. But the truth, the deep truth that cannot be shaken by what you feel, is that God's presence never leaves. Even in your loneliest seasons, he has been closer than your very breath. There's something powerful about understanding that God does not abandon us when the lights go out. He doesn't check out when the pressure rises. His presence doesn't fade because you messed up or because circumstances got messy. God's presence is not fragile. It doesn't get scared off by your doubts, by your tears, or even by your anger. He is steady, unmovable, unshakable. When you feel abandoned, what's really happening is that your heart is struggling to recognize his nearness. He hasn't left. You just can't see past the fog of your pain. Think about those times in your life when you thought it was over. Somehow a door opened. Somehow the weight lifted. Somehow a strength rose in you that you couldn't explain. That wasn't coincidence, and it wasn't luck. That was God's presence making sure that even when you couldn't carry yourself, his hand was carrying you. You didn't know it at the time, but his fingerprints were all over your survival. The problem is we often equate God's presence with feelings. If I feel peace, then he must be here. If I feel joy, then he must be moving. But what about when you feel nothing? What about when you wake up heavy and go to bed tired? Does that mean he walked away? No. That's when faith has to rise above feelings. Faith says, I know you're here, even when I can't sense you. I know you're working, even when I don't see the evidence. Feelings fluctuate, but his promise remains. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Sometimes God's presence is hidden because he's teaching you to trust his word more than your emotions. If he made you feel him every second, you'd never develop roots. You'd never learn to walk by faith. You'd never discover the strength that only comes from believing without seeing. It's in the silence that trust is born. It's in the stillness that you begin to realize God is not measured by noise. He is measured by truth. And if you really pause, you'll notice the subtle ways his presence has been with you all along. That friend who called just when you needed it. That moment of clarity in the middle of confusion. That peace that came after you cried yourself to sleep. Those weren't accidents. They were signs that God was standing guard, making sure you didn't collapse under the weight of it all. His presence is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's gentle, almost invisible, but it is never absent. The enemy loves to convince you that you are abandoned because if he can make you believe that lie, you will live defeated even though you are surrounded by God's glory. But when you choose to remind yourself, I am not alone, you strip the enemy of his greatest weapon. You stop rehearsing your fears and start declaring God's faithfulness. And that declaration changes everything, not because your situation instantly shifts, but because your heart does. You stop living as an abandoned child and start standing as a loved daughter or son who knows their father has never left their side. There's something freeing about realizing that God's presence has been the constant thread weaving through every chapter of your story. In the heartbreak, he was there. In the breakthrough, he was there. In the waiting, he was there. In the healing, he was there. And if he has been faithful in every season before, why would he stop now? Why would the God who carried you through the storm suddenly decide to let you drown? He is too consistent for that. He is too faithful for that. He is too committed to you to ever abandon you. So when you find yourself tempted to believe that you are walking alone, shift your perspective. Ask yourself, where has God been showing up in ways I overlooked? Maybe he showed up in the courage you didn't think you had. Maybe he showed up in the strength that kept you getting out of bed. Maybe he showed up in the wisdom that helped you make one more step forward. He's been showing up all along, but sometimes we need to train our hearts to notice the quiet miracles. Life is never going to be free of challenges, but what transforms those challenges is the awareness of God's presence. Knowing you are not abandoned doesn't always change the storm, but it changes how you endure it. It gives you an anchor when the waves try to pull you under. It gives you peace when the chaos tries to steal your sleep. It gives you confidence that no matter what tomorrow holds, you won't face it alone. So tonight, I need you to carry this truth in your spirit. God's presence has never left you. Not once, not for a second, not in your darkest valley, not in your deepest pain, not in your most silent prayer. He has been with you and he will remain with you. And that is enough reason to take your next step in trust. Trusting God sounds so beautiful when it's spoken on a stage or written on the pages of a book. But when you are standing in the middle of your own storm, trusting him feels like the hardest thing in the world. Because trust demands surrender. And surrender is where most of us struggle. We like to believe that faith is about praying harder, doing more, or being strong enough to handle whatever comes our way. But real trust is not about control. It is about releasing control. It is about letting go of the pen and allowing God to write the story, even when you don't like the plot. We live in a world that teaches us to hold tight, to fight for control, to never let our guard down. We are told that if we don't make it happen for ourselves, no one else will. That mindset might help in some areas of life, but it will leave you exhausted when it comes to your relationship with God. Because the truth is, you cannot fully trust him while still clinging to the illusion of control. The more you grip, the more anxious you become. The tighter you hold, the heavier it feels. But when you finally release it into his hands, that's when the peace comes. That's when the burden lifts. That's when you realize trust is not about having all the answers, but about believing that he does. Think about it this way: every time you wake up in the morning, you trust the ground beneath you to hold your weight. You don't spend time worrying about whether the floor will collapse. You just get up and walk. But when it comes to God, we hesitate. We question whether he will come through. We wonder if he'll really keep his promise. And yet he has been holding us up all along. Every breath, every blessing, every breakthrough is proof that he's been faithful. Even when we doubted him, trusting him is choosing to walk as freely in his promises as you do when you walk across the floor, confident that it won't give way. The hardest part about surrender is that it requires us to admit we don't have the power we thought we did. It forces us to face the truth that our plans, no matter how detailed, cannot compete with his wisdom. Some of us have been fighting battles we were never meant to fight, carrying weights we were never meant to carry, all because we are afraid to let go. But what if the breakthrough you've been praying for is waiting on the other side of surrender? What if the peace you've been searching for is unlocked when you finally hand over the pieces of your life you've been gripping so tightly? Trust doesn't mean you won't feel fear. It doesn't mean you won't wrestle with doubt. It means you decide to lean into God's character more than your emotions. It means you declare, even though I don't understand, I will still believe. Trust is not the absence of questions. It is the choice to take your questions to the one who holds the answers. When you give him your uncertainty, he doesn't shame you. When you lay down your control, he doesn't reject you. He takes what you surrender and transforms it into something greater than you could have built on your own. And here's the thing: surrender is not a one-time event. It's a daily choice. It's waking up every morning and deciding again, God, I don't know what today holds, but I choose to place it in your hands. It's whispering in the middle of chaos, God, I still trust you. It's reminding yourself when worry rises that God has a record of being faithful and his record has no failures. Some of you have been carrying the weight of trying to control everything around you, your family, your finances, your future, and it has drained the life out of you. But God never asked you to be the one holding it all together. He asked you to trust him with it. He asked you to rest in his strength instead of exhausting your own. And the moment you release it, you discover he can do more with your surrender than you could ever do with your striving. Think about how many times you've looked back on a situation that didn't go the way you planned, only to realize later that it worked out better than you imagined. That's what happens when you trust him. He sees what you can't. He knows what's ahead when all you can see is what's in front of you. Trusting him is not blind faith. It's wise faith, because you're placing your life in the hands of the one who sees the beginning and the end at the same time. I know it's hard to loosen your grip when you feel like everything will fall apart if you let go. But can I tell you something? You were never the one holding it all together in the first place. It has always been him. Every heartbeat, every step, every door that opened was his hand at work. You can trust him, not because life is easy, but because he has proven over and over again that he is faithful. So tonight, stop trying to fix what only God can heal. Stop trying to control what only God can orchestrate. Trust him enough to let go, because surrender is not losing. It's the only way to win. And when you finally release it all into his hands, you'll find that those same hands have been holding you every step of the way. We live in a world where struggle is often viewed as punishment, as if hard times automatically mean God has abandoned us or that we've fallen short of his love. But what if I told you your struggles are not signs of God's absence? They are stages of his preparation, the very weight you are carrying right now. The very valley you are walking through may be the training ground for the destiny you've been praying for, because God doesn't waste pain. He doesn't allow you to go through fire unless he intends to refine something in you. And sometimes what feels like breaking is actually the shaping that prepares you for what's ahead. Think about it. The strongest soldiers are not trained in comfort. They're not shaped by easy days and calm nights. They are forged in challenge, discipline, and pressure. And God, in his wisdom, knows that if he gave you the promise without preparation, the blessing might crush you instead of build you. Struggle is not evidence that he has left you. It's evidence that he's equipping you. Every tear, every setback, every battle is working something in you that you may not see now, but will thank him for later. We often cry out, God, why me? Why this? Why now? And though we may not get the answers we want, we can trust that his perspective is bigger than ours. You only see the page you're on, but he sees the whole book. You only feel the weight of today, but he knows what tomorrow will demand from you. The struggle that feels unbearable right now may be producing the endurance you will need to walk into the doors he is about to open. If you skip the struggle, you miss the strength. If you avoid the pressure, you miss the preparation. Sometimes God allows delays because he's building resilience. Sometimes he allows disappointments because he's shaping humility. Sometimes he allows closed doors because he's protecting you from walking into a room that would have destroyed you. What feels like rejection may actually be redirection. What feels like loss may actually be preservation. But in the moment, all we feel is pain. And that's why trust is so vital. You don't have to understand every detail to believe that God is still present, still working, still weaving every thread of your story together for good. Look back over your life. Remember the moments you thought would break you. Somehow you're still standing. Remember the seasons where you didn't see a way forward. Somehow a way opened. That was preparation at work. God didn't just deliver you, he developed you in the process. And the version of you standing today is stronger, wiser, and more resilient than the version of you before the storm. You may not have wanted the struggle, but you needed what it built inside you. We have to learn to shift our perspective and stop interpreting struggle as punishment. Just because life gets heavy does not mean God has turned his back on you. Sometimes it means he trusts you enough to allow you to be tested because he already placed the strength in you to endure. He knows what you are capable of, even when you doubt yourself. And though the process may feel overwhelming, the presence of struggle is often the clearest sign that God is positioning you for more. You see, destiny comes with weight. Calling comes with responsibility. Favor comes with battles. And if you want to walk in the fullness of what God has for you, you cannot skip the stages of preparation. Your struggle may not make sense now, but one day you will look back and realize that the very season you wanted to escape was the one that equipped you to stand in your purpose. The storm built your faith. The wilderness taught you to hear God's voice. The battle revealed your courage. Without the struggle, you would not be ready for what's next. I know it's easy to wish away the pain. I know it's tempting to pray, Lord, take this away. But maybe the more powerful prayer is, Lord, teach me through this. Grow me in this. Show me what you are preparing me for. Because once you realize that struggle is not the end of the story, but part of the process, you stop despising it and start learning from it. You start seeing your tears as seeds, your trials as training, your pressure as proof that God is molding something greater in you. And let's be honest, sometimes the very thing we begged God for comes with unexpected challenges. We ask him for influence, but influence requires character. We ask him for opportunity, but opportunity requires discipline. We ask him for love, but love requires patience. And God in his grace allows the struggle to stretch us so that we don't sabotage the blessing when it arrives. He loves you too much to hand you something you're not prepared to handle. So the next time you feel the weight of struggle pressing down on you, remind yourself this is not abandonment, this is preparation. God is not punishing you, He is preparing you. He is working in ways you cannot see, strengthening you in places you didn't know were weak, building you for victories you haven't even imagined yet. And when the breakthrough comes, and it will, you'll realize that the struggle was never wasted. It was the very tool God used to get you ready for the life He promised you. We often wait for the perfect moment to step out, the perfect sign from heaven, the perfect conditions where there's no fear, no risk, no uncertainty. We convince ourselves that once everything is clear, once all the answers are laid out in front of us, then we'll move forward. But that's not how faith works. Faith doesn't ask for certainty. It asks for obedience. And sometimes all God is waiting for is one small step, not the whole journey, not a flawless plan, not a bold leap that makes sense to everyone around you, just one small act of faith. Because in the kingdom of God, little steps open the door to big breakthroughs. When you think about it, some of the greatest miracles in Scripture started with simple acts. Moses raising his staff, even though it seemed foolish in front of the Red Sea. David picking up a stone, even though it looked insignificant against Goliath. The woman with the issue of blood reaching out to touch the hem of Jesus' garment, even though she felt unworthy. None of those actions looked like they had enough power to change everything. But the moment they took the step, God released the breakthrough. The sea parted, the giant fell, the healing came. That's the power of a small step in the hands of a big God. The enemy wants you paralyzed, stuck in the what ifs. What if I fail? What if they laugh? What if it doesn't work out? But what if the very thing you've been praying for is on the other side of that small step you're afraid to take? What if your miracle is waiting for you to move, even if it feels shaky, even if it feels uncertain? The enemy loves hesitation because hesitation keeps you stuck in cycles. But faith breaks cycles. Faith says, I don't know how this will unfold, but I trust the one who asked me to move. We often underestimate the significance of small beginnings. We want the platform, but we don't want the process. We want the finished product, but we don't want to start with the seed. And yet God has a way of using the small to unlock the great. A small prayer whispered in the dark can move heaven. A small act of forgiveness can break generational chains. A small step of obedience can shift the entire trajectory of your life. You may not see it immediately, but heaven responds to small faith because it's not about the size of your step. It's about the size of your God. Sometimes the reason we hesitate is because we think our step has to be dramatic or impressive. But God isn't looking for dramatic. He's looking for genuine. He's not asking you to leap tall mountains in one day. He's asking you to take the next step He's placed in front of you. That might mean making the call you've been putting off. That might mean applying for the job even if you don't feel qualified. That might mean opening your Bible again after months of silence. That might mean forgiving someone even though your heart still aches. These may feel like small things, but in God's hands, they are the keys to breakthrough. Think about the disciples. Jesus asked them to cast their nets on the other side of the boat, a small shift, nothing dramatic, just a different direction. And when they obeyed, the catch was so great their nets nearly broke. What if your breakthrough isn't about doing more, but about obeying in the small? What if the abundance you've been waiting for is tied to a small act of faith that looks ordinary but carries extraordinary results? The beauty of taking small steps is that they build momentum. One step of faith gives you courage for the next. One act of obedience makes the next act a little easier. And before you know it, you're walking in places you once thought were impossible. The steps may be small, but they lead to a path of transformation. God doesn't expect you to run the whole race in one breath. He's asking you to trust Him with each stride, one at a time. And here's the grace of it. Even if you stumble, even if you misstep, God knows how to redirect. Trusting Him with small steps doesn't mean you'll never falter. It means that even when you do, His hand is steady enough to pull you back up. Sometimes we delay obedience because we're afraid of getting it wrong, but God's love is big enough to reroute us. The only way you truly lose is by refusing to move at all. So don't despise the small beginnings. Don't overlook the quiet acts of faith. Don't wait for perfect conditions to move. Step forward with what you have from where you are with the trust that God will meet you in motion. because your small step is not insignificant. It's the key that unlocks the miracle. And when you look back, you'll realize it wasn't about the size of your faith. It was about the size of your God who honored it. Fear has a way of making its presence known louder than almost anything else in our lives. It doesn't whisper softly. It screams in the middle of the night. It echoes in your thoughts when you try to step forward. It clings to your heart when you're about to take a risk. Fear has a voice that loves to repeat your past failures, exaggerate your present circumstances, and convince you that your future will never change. And because fear is so loud, it can drown out everything else if you let it. But here's the truth: God's whisper, though softer, carries more weight than every shout of fear combined. His whisper is not always dramatic, but it is steady, it is certain, and it is powerful enough to quiet every storm in your soul. It's important to recognize that fear feeds on uncertainty. It grows when you don't know what's next, when the outcome is unclear, when life feels out of control. That's when fear's voice gets louder, telling you to stay where you are, to give up, to believe you'll never see change. But God's whisper doesn't feed on clarity, it creates it. When he speaks into your spirit, even in the softest tone, it brings direction where there was confusion, calm where there was chaos, and hope where there was despair. His whisper doesn't need to be loud because it carries authority. One word from him has the power to override every lie fear has been screaming into your life. Sometimes we think we need God to shout, to split the heavens, to give us a dramatic sign to reassure us that he's still there. But often he chooses the whisper. He chooses the still small voice that requires us to quiet everything else and lean in close. Because when you have to lean in, when you have to silence the noise around you, you build intimacy with him. You learn to recognize his tone, his presence, his reassurance. And once you've heard his whisper, fear loses its grip because you know the one who is speaking is greater than anything you face. Think about Elijah. He stood on the mountain and there was wind and earthquake and fire. Yet God was not in any of those loud, dramatic displays. He came in a gentle whisper. And that whisper was enough to remind Elijah that God was with him, that his life still had purpose, that fear didn't have the final say. The same is true for us. We often want God to come in the fire or the earthquake, but he comes in the whisper because he wants us to know that his presence is not about spectacle. It's about certainty. His whisper carries more assurance than any storm. Fear loves to shout about your weaknesses, but God whispers about your strength in him. Fear reminds you of every time you fell short, but God whispers that his grace is sufficient. Fear paints pictures of failure, but God whispers that he has plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Fear tells you to retreat, but God whispers that he goes before you and will never leave you. And the power of his whisper is that it doesn't just compete with fear. It cancels it. It silences it. Because light doesn't need to argue with darkness. It simply shines and darkness cannot stay. One of the most freeing things you can do is learn to tune your ear to God's whisper instead of fear's shouts. That means choosing stillness when everything in you wants to panic. That means opening his word and letting his promises fill your mind when worry tries to take over. That means pausing long enough to remember that if he brought you through before, he can do it again. Fear will always try to be louder, but volume doesn't equal truth. And truth will always outlast noise. If you look back, you'll see that fear has shouted at you before. It told you that you wouldn't survive that heartbreak, but you did. It told you that you wouldn't recover from that failure, but you did. It told you that you wouldn't make it through that season, but you did. Fear has been loud, but it has been wrong. And God's whisper has been the constant that carried you forward even when you didn't realize it. His steady voice has been guiding your steps, comforting your heart, and reminding you that no matter how loud fear gets, it cannot drown out his truth. And here's the beauty of it. When you learn to live by his whisper, you no longer need fear to be silent in order for you to have peace. Fear might still try to shout, but you'll know how to rest anyway, because you've tuned yourself to the voice that matters. You'll realize that fear doesn't get the final word because God already spoke his promises over your life. And once God has spoken, no lie of the enemy can undo it. So the next time fear comes roaring, don't waste your energy shouting back. Just lean in closer to the whisper. Remind yourself that his voice carries more power than every shout of fear combined. And let his whisper guide you into the peace, the courage, and the confidence you need to take your next step forward. One of the most exhausting parts of being human is the way our minds constantly race toward the future. We worry about how things will unfold, how needs will be met, how dreams will come to pass, and how battles will be won. We play out scenarios in our head, most of them worst case, and the weight of tomorrow starts crushing us before tomorrow even arrives. But here is the truth that should set your heart free. God is already in the future you are worried about. He's not waiting at the finish line wondering if you'll make it. He's already there preparing the way, arranging details, fighting battles, and working things together for your good. Think about that for a moment. You are stressing about a tomorrow that God has already stepped into. You're losing sleep over questions that He's already answered. You're carrying anxiety about problems He has already provided solutions for. Time does not limit Him the way it limits us. While you are here in the present, He is in your past redeeming what you thought was wasted. He is in your present strengthening you for today. And He is in your future setting up blessings you haven't even imagined yet. When you trust Him, you don't have to live weighed down by what's ahead because the one who holds tomorrow is already there. Most of us struggle with this because we want visibility. We want to know the timeline, the how, the when, the who. We feel safer when we can see the blueprint. But God rarely hands out blueprints. He gives daily bread. He provides just enough light for the next step. And the reason is simple. If you saw the whole journey, you might be overwhelmed. If you knew every valley you would have to walk through before you reach the mountain, you might give up before you begin. So instead, God says, trust me for today. Trust that when you arrive at tomorrow, I'll already be there. When you look back over your life, you'll see this truth written all over your story. Think about a season you once dreaded, a moment you thought you couldn't survive. You worried, you cried, you asked 1,000 questions. But when you arrived, God had already gone before you. There were people waiting to help, opportunities you didn't plan for, strength you didn't know you had. It didn't make sense at the time, but when you came through, you realized He had been ahead of you all along. And if He's been faithful to go before you in the past, why would He stop now? This is why we're told not to be anxious about tomorrow. It's not because tomorrow won't have challenges, it will. It's because those challenges will never meet you alone. They will meet you and the God who has already prepared you for them. When you arrive in a place you thought would crush you, you'll find that God has already laid down provision. When you face a battle you thought you couldn't win, you'll find that God has already weakened the enemy. When you step into a season you thought you weren't ready for, you'll discover that God has already equipped you in ways you didn't even notice. The enemy would love nothing more than to keep you stuck in fear about the future, because a fearful heart can't fully embrace the present. You start missing today's blessings because you're consumed with tomorrow's worries. But when you shift your focus and remind yourself, God is already there, you can rest. You can breathe. You can live today with peace, knowing that tomorrow is not empty. It's already filled with His presence. Sometimes we treat the future like it's this uncharted, dangerous territory we're stepping into blindly. But it's not blind if God is leading. He has already walked the road you are about to take. He knows the turns, the pitfalls, the detours, and the blessings waiting at each stop. Nothing will surprise Him. Nothing will catch Him off guard. You may feel like you're walking into the unknown, but for Him, it's already known. And that means you're safe. So instead of letting worry consume you, choose trust. Instead of playing the what if game, remember the already is. God already is in your future. He already is working it out. He already is making a way. That perspective changes everything because you realize you don't have to figure it all out. You just have to walk with the one who already has. And here's the peace that comes from this truth. You can stop rushing ahead. You can stop trying to control outcomes. You can stop living in fear of what's next. Because if God is already there, then you have nothing to fear. Tomorrow doesn't have the power to destroy you when the God who promised to keep you has already stepped into it. So tonight, release the weight of what's ahead. Rest in the assurance that the God who has carried you this far is not only with you now, but waiting for you in every tomorrow. And when you arrive, you will find that He has already prepared the way. One of the most freeing revelations you will ever embrace is that God has promised never to leave you nor forsake you. It sounds so simple, yet it is one of the most life-changing truths when it truly settles in your spirit. Life has a way of making us feel abandoned. People walk away, relationships break down, friends grow distant, and even those who love us most can't always be there when we need them. But God is not like people. He doesn't change his mind about you. He doesn't leave when things get hard. He doesn't disappear when your struggles are too heavy. His promise is not conditional. His word is his bond, and when he says, I will never leave you, he means it through every valley, every storm, every mountaintop, and every wilderness. The reason this truth matters so much is because loneliness can distort how we see life. When you feel alone, you begin to think you're unsupported, forgotten, and even unloved. You might convince yourself that your prayers don't matter or that God has overlooked you. But feelings are not facts. God's presence is not dependent on how you feel in the moment. You might not sense him, but he is still there. You might not hear him speaking, but he is still listening. You might not see evidence of him working, but he is still moving. That is why faith is required. It anchors us in the truth that even in silence, he is near. Sometimes God allows you to walk through seasons where his presence feels hidden, not because he's gone, but because he's stretching your faith. Just like a parent teaching a child to walk takes a few steps back to encourage them to move forward, God sometimes lets you feel the stretch of independence so you learn to trust his promise more than your perception. He has never left you, not once, not for a second. Even in the darkest nights of your soul, he was holding you together. Even when your heart broke, he was catching the pieces. Even when you didn't understand why, his presence was surrounding you in ways you couldn't yet recognize. Think about the times when you thought you wouldn't survive. Somehow you did. Think about the battles that should have destroyed you but didn't. Think about the nights you cried yourself to sleep and still managed to wake up in the morning. That strength didn't come from you. It came from the God who was with you, steadying you when you didn't even realize it. His presence is not just comforting, it's sustaining. Without him, you wouldn't have made it this far. And if his presence has kept you until now, it will keep you until the very end. This promise should shift how you walk through life. You don't have to enter any room timidly when you know you're not walking in alone. You don't have to face decisions paralyzed by fear when you know the Spirit of God is guiding you. You don't have to live weighed down by the fear of abandonment when you know the Creator of the universe has bound himself to you with unbreakable love. That truth should give you confidence, courage, and peace. You are never outnumbered, never unsupported, and never forsaken, no matter what it looks like. And let's be honest, sometimes it does look like you're by yourself. People won't always understand your calling. They won't always see the vision God gave you. They won't always support the path you're on. That's okay. You don't need everyone to understand when God already promised to stand with you. David said it best. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are